Hello, welcome back to Crit and Crit. I'm Calm,
I'm Axion.
and we are continuing our playthrough of Undertale and our discussion of Brian Jake's Redwall. So, we've kind of touched on today's topic a fair bit in a prior episode, but I wanted to get a little more specific with some of how Redwall set dressing appears. So, we talked about magic and mysticism and how Redwall is not a very magical series. Sans, what are you doing?
Nothing at the moment.
See all this. I just see all the smoke under the door, and I'm concerned. Oh boy. I know so many kids who would have that exact conversation with each other. Anyway, so it's not a very magical series, but it does tend to lean heavily into the mysticism. And, well, mysticism often gets conflated with the idea of spirituality and metaphysics and, to some extent, belief in a higher power, which is kind of what I wanted to look at with regards to Redwall. Because though Redwall is not itself an explicitly faith-based series, there are a lot of elements about it that do have a very religious connotation.
So, to start with, Jacques himself has definitively declared on multiple occasions that there is no religion in Redwall. There is no faith or widespread practice of religion in the setting. And that both Redwall itself, despite being a monastery, and the building referred to in universe as St. Ninian's, despite the name, are not actually religious institutions. Redwall Abbey seems to be more of a Redwall seems to be more of a mixture of a I don't know the right word for this because so many of the words that we would normally use to describe something like this have inherent religious implications in the real world that are not there in the world of Redwall.
See, this is actually a problem that comes up quite frequently with regards to secondary world fantasies, which is just I'm going to take a place. It's not Earth. I'm making it up myself. It's not like our reality, but I don't have the language to make something entirely new because then nobody would have any sort of touchstone for what I'm talking about. So I'm going to take terms from our world and transplant them here, regardless of how well it makes sense with the new world building. Like, they don't have saints in Redwall, but things are called saint. As I recall, Bright was a movie that was particularly bad about this with regards to what if this but this? And therefore, if you stop to think about the implications of the world building for more than 30 seconds, a lot of stuff starts to go boom. Yeah, like Redwall Abbey is not a religious institution, according to Brian Jacques, but it seems very heavily colored as one. Because most places like it in our reality, like most little peaceful communes where everybody is called brother and sister and they have a leader who is an abbot, are religious cloisters. Like, there's not a whole lot of way to get around that. So, to get around that, Jake sort of had to come up with something completely new, but these are books meant for kids. And throwing a new concept like that and having to teach them all this extra world-building stuff would have detracted from trying to tell a simple heroes and villains story. But, yeah, it does kind of make for an odd read when you take all this into account.
Yeah, the closest thing that I can think of with regards to what Redwall is like in the real world that is similar in style but devoid of the religious connotations is something like a socio-political commune. Like a bunch of people living out in the wilderness because they disagree with the actual extent political systems of the world around them. And we have several examples of these out in the real world, but the problem is the ones in the real world, while not universally so, are often associated with really extreme belief practices and really problematic, like, cults. You have groups like militia groups out in Montana and things like Heaven's Gate in California, or what was the other one? The Jim Jones compound.
Jonestown?
Jonestown, yes. I don't know why that slipped my mind. But these kind of things are the closest thing we seem to have in the real world to what Redwall is trying to be as a collective, non-religious cooperative. The real world doesn't seem to have a lot of things like that. So trying to compare it to something while keeping that non-religious affiliation in mind is really difficult, because all of the comparative examples are very are either very religious, so something that is more explicitly similar to what Redwall is like with the abbey structure and all of that sort of thing, or something that has these concerning connections. So it's difficult to kind of put ourselves in that mind space just because of the way our own experiences are set up.
Yep. Though I think it also has a little bit of extra going on in the background. One, there's a very common association with a large proportion of the population that, look, these peaceful people in a semi-religious commune who are here for peace and taking care of people are automatically coded as good. While your mileage may vary with your experience with that, for a lot of young kids, that has been their experience, and that's a good author's shorthand for a simplified kid's black and white morality story. 2, Martin the Warrior is kind of a Christ allegory in some ways. He is an almost legendary being at this point who helped found their abbey, helped save the forest from a horrific threat in many generations past. Very little is actually understood about him today. Like, having read the stories where you learn his backstory, they have a lot of information about him just straight up wrong and kind of miss a lot about what he was really like. Mostly he was depressed, as we've mentioned. but they practically worship him. And then if we take it to its logical conclusion, we have Matthias as his second coming. His successor, meant to pick up the mantle for him, who looks very much like him, takes very much after him. And if you really want to dig into this, practically dies when he falls into the pond with King Wolfsparrow. So essentially he died to help save the Abbey, and therefore he came back to defeat Clooney, who outright invokes hell and Satan early on in the story. So while the books themselves are not meant to have a strong religious connotation or message, it's kind of hard to ignore the fact that there's a lot of literature that does lean into the messianic archetype, which I think Redwall does.
It actually goes a step further than that. During the time that Matthias is thought dead, is when he goes, retrieves the sword, and slays a serpent named Asmodeus.
Okay, that's the second time he's thought dead, then, because remember the first time is when they actually pull him out of the pond, and they have to bring him back, and then he wanders off, and they don't know where the heck he is.
Yeah, he gets thrown out of the Abbey by one of the fights.
Right.
And takes that opportunity to go looking for the sword, and ends up with the shrews, yeah, with Logolog and the others.
And he tames them. I'm so sorry.
Oh no. But yeah, during that time, he recovers the sword in what could be seen as kind of an Excalibur counterpart as well, on top of everything else. And he slays Asmodeus.
Which itself is a very loaded name.
Yeah. I mean, Clooney's goons even say, when they first hear that Asmodeus is in the area and that they are going to possibly have to deal with it, that it is the devil, or a devil, and that they've heard all these horrible stories about it, and that it's one of the few things that even Clooney's underlings are willing to admit. It scares them as much as their boss.
But yeah, so, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with having that kind of symbolism in a book. It's just interesting to note on.
Yep. It's also just an acknowledgement that a lot of religious implications are so heavily built into our own individual experiences in the real world, that,
at least in like a Western tradition of literature,
right? Yeah, sorry.
Like, regardless of your own personal beliefs, it is impossible to deny the effect that that Create has had on Western art and entertainment. Like, so much classical music, which includes a good boatload of operas, is drawn on Judeo-Christian tradition. And then, of course, biblical allusions are just rampant throughout literature, because authors want you to know they're a smart person who reads books, and if you get this reference, you are also a smart person who reads books. High five. It's like you mentioned the Excalibur connection, King Arthur's knights. There's a whole lot of Christian symbolism and ideology throughout those. So, yeah.
Yep, and we do plan on looking into some of the King Arthur stories at a later date.
We have so many things we plan to look on. Let's not make too many promises right now. But yeah, I'm not really sure what else to add here.
Yep. I think this one wrapped it up pretty shortly. See y'all next time.
See ya.